I know that we have visitors with us, as we often do. And it is certainly my hope and my prayer for you that you'll be encouraged and uplifted by what we're doing together today. We hope that all is done in the name of the Lord, that we can look at the Scriptures and that we can model our behavior and our worship as well as our faith and the substance of our faith after what we read in those same Scriptures. So if you have any questions at all, please come up to any one of us afterward. We'd love to share our faith with you and talk about those Scriptures. So just let me know if you have any thoughts or questions about our congregation, the Bible, about God, and about His Son, Jesus Christ, and we'll talk through those things together. Am I getting a lot of reverb to everybody else? I feel like I can hear myself right now. Yeah, just be aware of that. I don't know how to fix that. I'm not the sound guy. So we're going to talk about something this morning that's seasonally appropriate. We'll put it that way. As seasonally appropriate as my tie this morning. My tie, by the way, is quite the fashion statement for me. This was given to me by my nephew a few years ago, my nephew Charlie. And the tie even had a now defunct sound box inside of it. You could click in it, it would play a Christmas-themed soundtrack. Definitely one of those ties that once a year, you're like, I think I have to wear the Christmas tie today. So here I am being a good sport, wearing the Christmas tie. Because I want to talk about some things related to the Christmas season. I want to talk about some misconceptions or maybe some Christmisconceptions. See what I did there? I'm so clever and stylish. It's the complete package. I want to talk about some of the misconceptions that we tend to kind of bring with Christmas. And to be sure, misunderstandings about Christmas, about the Bible, about the nativity story itself, and about who Jesus was and what He stood for and what He did with His life, those misunderstandings abound when it comes to our celebration of Christmas. And we need to be very, very careful that as people who love the Bible and who love God and who believe that truth actually matters, we need to be careful that we ourselves are not in any way mishandling the story of Jesus Christ. We need to make sure that any of our traditions that we practice or the prevailing traditions of the culture that surround us also don't change our behavior and our thinking and impact us negatively. And we need to make sure that our priorities as Christ representing people, as saints, that our priorities are properly aligned with God's priorities. Now, just in case anybody thinks that I'm being a stick in the mud here, listen, I wore the tie, okay? So, I love Christmas. We celebrate Christmas. We have a Christmas tree up. And there are images of rosy-cheeked Santa Clauses in our house. So I'm a good sport when it comes to that. This is not an anti-Christmas sermon. I want to be very clear, very upfront about that. This is not an anti-Christmas sermon as such. But I think there is something more important that needs to be the prevailing theme in all of our activities as Christians, whether it's in this building worshiping God or living out our faith in the world, that we as the church, we are the pillar and the support of the truth in 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 15. And so truth actually matters to us, or at least it ought to matter. It's in John chapter 8, Jesus said it's the truth that will set you free. It's lies that keep you bound. It's misjudgments and misunderstandings that keep you living in darkness. It is only Jesus who is the way, the truth, and the life. It is only Jesus that enlightens every man in John chapter 1, who brings light and truth to the world. Where Moses might have brought the law, grace and truth are realized in Jesus. A great passage in Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9, that in all of these things that we dwell upon, in Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, we dwell upon truth is the very first one that he lists in Philippians 4, verse 8. Whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is any excellence and if anything worthy of praise, let your mind dwell on these things. And we always stop there. We forget to read verse 9, because verse 9 is a really, really great point also. The things that you've learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things that are apostolically approved, things that are inspired, things that are actually true and God ordained. Practice these things. And what's the result? What's the last thing he says there in verse 8? And the God of peace shall be with you. When you dwell upon truth and you practice truth, and you learn truth and you teach truth to other people, the God of peace dwells in your life. So I would say truth actually matters. There are three big issues that confront me when it comes to Christmas. Three big problems that I have, not with Christmas itself in some categoric sense, but three issues that I think come up very frequently in our lives when it comes to Christmas. Problematic issues that we need to face. The first one is mishandling and misrepresentation of the biblical story of Jesus and the Nativity. I mean, just the fact that many stories or many presentations of it are just jumbled and outright incorrect in the handling of the facts of Jesus coming to this world, I think is a really, really sad state. A second one that we'll look at is this looming spirit of materialism. And I don't know if that's always been a problem in every culture, but it certainly is a problem in our culture. The stuff. All the stuff. The gifts and the food and the abundance. And we'll talk about that one a little bit also. And a third one is just a lack of discernment that we sometimes have in understanding what is dangerous versus what's harmless. And sometimes we think the dangerous things are harmless, and we think the harmless things are actually going to send us to hell. And we need to learn as we grow in our faith and knowledge to discern, as Hebrews chapter 5 says, to discern between what is actually good and what is actually evil. So, with our time together here, I hope to address these three big issues that tend to come up when it comes to Christmas. And we'll start with the nativity story itself. There are two passages in the Gospels that go through the birth of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Luke chapter 2, verses 1 through 21, and in Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Unfortunately, we don't have a ton of time today to talk about every single element of these stories, but as you read them, and I highly recommend that you read them, a little word of advice. Your knowledge of who Jesus is and where he came from and the story that surrounds that, your knowledge about Jesus needs to come from the Word and not from how it might be presented in other ways. You can't find the truth just alone in a children's story or a Christmas pageant or in like an Advent calendar or a board book that a toddler would read. Like, if you want to know where Jesus came from and what his story is, you have to read it from the Scriptures. And there are actually a lot of things about the nativity story that do get jumbled up and mishandled in Christmas pageants and stories and that sort of thing. There's just outright like facts about that story that get mixed up. The three wise men, for example, never said that there are three of them, first of all. I don't know how many there were. It's never said there were three of them. And the fact that the three wise men, see what I did there? The fact that the wise men, in all likelihood, did not actually come to the manger in Bethlehem. But in all likelihood, they probably came as late as 2 years after the birth of Jesus to come see him. And it's just facts like that when you read Luke 2 and Matthew 2 and you actually read them at face value, you go, I guess I didn't even realize that's how the story went. I had no idea that thing happened before that thing, or that this was actually how that happened. I want to read from Luke chapter 2, just a really important part of this story here, just for our purposes today. I want to talk a little bit about the shepherds who are described in Luke chapter 2 to demonstrate a couple of things here. First, the beauty of this story, because we always need to be really careful in debunking something, that we don't just become sort of only interested in debunking something and not focusing on, this is actually a really, really cool story. And that's what I want to look at here in Luke chapter 2. And start here in Luke chapter 2 and verse 8. Now in the same region there were some shepherds staying out in the fields and keeping watch over their flock by night. And an angel of the Lord suddenly before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terribly frightened. And it's throughout the Bible, most people who meet angels, like Isaiah, for example, are terribly frightened by what they see. They're not like fat babies or something with little wings. Angels are terribly frightening. And so these shepherds were terribly frightened by what they saw. And the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid, for behold, I bring you good news of a great joy, which shall be for all the people. For today in the city of David, there's been born for you a Savior, who is Christ, Messiah, the Lord. And this will be a sign for you. You'll find a baby wrapped in cloths or swaddling blankets and lying in a manger." Suddenly there appeared with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, in verse 14, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace among men." Here's one of those parts of the story that also gets overlooked frequently. Peace on earth, peace to all men. Wait, there's another part to that verse, isn't there? With whom God is well pleased. Right, we forget about that part. Built into the nativity story is the redemption story as well. Built into the story of what God has done for us is a less than subtle hint about the obedience that we need to have toward Him, with whom God is pleased. And it came about in verse 15. When the angels had gone away from them into heaven, that the shepherds began saying to one another, "Let us go straight to Bethlehem then, and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has made known to us." They came in haste, and they found their way to Mary and Joseph and the baby as he lay in the manger. And when they had seen this, in verse 17, they made known the statement which had been told them about this child. And all who heard it wondered at the things which were told them by the shepherds. Mary, for her part, in verse 19, treasured up all these things, pondering them in her heart. And the shepherds went back glorifying and praising God for all that they had heard and seen, just as had been told them. Now, one of the main reasons why it's important for us to handle this story accurately is because, to a lot of skeptics, the nativity story is a source of Bible contradictions. Dr. Bart Ehrman, for example, who's a noted Bible scholar and also an agnostic, borderline atheist, I think probably would be his own description of himself. Even though he's a Bible expert, he tends to think that there's multiple contradictions between what Luke says and what Matthew says, between these two presentations of the nativity story. But I think if you handle them correctly, and I have looked really closely at his presentations and his writings on the supposed contradictions, there are ways that you can reconcile the Matthew account and the Luke account so that they're saying the same thing. But a lot of it just has to do with, are you handling these things correctly? Because if you don't handle them correctly, then yes, this kind of stereotypically pageantized vanilla version of the nativity story is the source of a lot of ridicule for Bible skeptics. And I think it firmly places Jesus into the realm of fairy tale. Think about, by the way, how Jesus is often portrayed in our literature and our artwork. Historically, what does baby Jesus look like in artwork? From the Middle Ages to the Renaissance to even a lot of modern artwork, what does Jesus look like in the manger? Well, if you go back to the Renaissance, he looks like a 40-year-old man. Like, first of all, that's one of those weird things. Do a little research on that sometime and why it is that medieval and Renaissance artists always portray Jesus looking like a fat little 40-year-old man. It's a really interesting kind of history behind that. But he's always got like a halo around him, and all the animals are always like, oh, it's the baby Jesus. There's like donkeys and lambs like looking with excitement. And it's always really clean, by the way. It's always clean. In Silent Night, right? Silent Night. We sing the song. And it's like this perfect and like idyllic setting. Have you ever seen a baby being born? Have you ever seen a manger? My grandfather bred horses. Preston's family raises black Angus. Like this is not some like the way that art has it portrayed. We were at Hobby Lobby yesterday, and there was a nativity scene gingerbread cookie set. That's not what it was like. And I'll put it this way: the reality of the coming of Jesus is compelling and powerful enough that it needs no embellishment or pageantry. And it certainly doesn't need to be sanitized or made to taste like vanilla. It was real. It was real. God Himself was with us in the form of a baby being born in one of the worst possible places that a baby could be born, to parents who were dirt poor nobodies. That's real. And a glowing plastic Jesus in the nativity scene in your front yard does not do the reality of Jesus in the flesh any justice. It's goofy and demeaning the way that it's often portrayed. Now I want to move on to my second problem that I typically have when it comes to Christmas, and that is the materialism that's associated with it. And you could preach this any time of the year, really. This isn't just a December thing. This is any time of year. But the season of giving, as it's often called, does get overshadowed by this ever-looming materialism in our culture. And there is certainly abundant biblical teaching on the way that wealth, or the love of wealth, I should properly say, is incompatible with Christian discipleship. We don't have time to study all of these things, but Jesus in His own ministry talks in Matthew chapter 6, in the midst of the Sermon on the Mount, of the way that this is incompatible. That you can have treasures on earth or you can have treasures in heaven. Where do you place your treasure? He's of course talking about priorities and where our passion is and where our love is and what we're really accumulating. But you can't serve two masters, Jesus says. You can serve wealth and earthly things, or you can serve God, but you can't find this happy medium between them. There's no fence to be ridden between serving God and serving earthly wealth. In Matthew chapter 19, He tells a rich young ruler who, with a lot of eagerness, I think, comes to Him and says, what do I need to do to be a part of the kingdom of heaven? He says, well, you got to follow the laws first. Well, I've done all that. I've done that. Is there anything else I can do? Anything? Well, you can sell all your possessions, and you can give the money to the poor, and you can come and follow after me. And the man went away grieved because that was just a bridge too far for him. And so Jesus turned and looked at His disciples, and He said, it is really, really hard for a rich man to get into the kingdom. In fact, it would be easier to stuff a camel through the eye of a needle than it would be for a rich man to get into the kingdom. In 1 Timothy chapter 6, the Apostle Paul talks at some length about the problems and dangers of loving money, that the love of money is a root of all sorts of evil. And because of it, people have hurt themselves in their lives. And so he ends his letter in 1 Timothy 6, he ends it by saying, instruct those who are rich in this present world not to be conceited and fix their hope on their money. They need to learn to share it, to give it away. Because if they do that, they'll be accumulating those treasures that Jesus talked about in Matthew chapter 6. Ecclesiastes chapter 2 very rightly describes the plight of the sinner. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, take a look at the last two verses of this chapter. Verses 24 through 26 is what I really want to look at here. I love the way that he talks in Ecclesiastes 2, framing it of where's your love, where's your priority. There's nothing better for a man, Ecclesiastes 2:24. There's nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and tell himself that his labor is good, for also I have seen this, that it is from the hand of God. Who can eat and who can drink and have enjoyment without him? Verse 26, for to a person who's good in God's sight, he's given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner, he's given the task of what? Gathering and collecting. That is like the saddest statement in Ecclesiastes. You know, that's your job. That's your purpose in life, is gathering and collecting. Gotta fill up the crawl space with stuff. Gotta fill up the closet with clothes I don't wear. Gotta fill up the garage with toys. I saw a video I like car videos. I love car videos. There was these guys, they were going out and they were kind of restoring cars that had been abandoned, like barn find type cars. And they went out to a guy's property and he had an Audi R8 and an Acura NSX just sitting out in the woods, rotting away. And they asked him, so, like, what happened? Like, at what point did you just did these cars just get neglected? He said, well, we just had other toys in the garage. Like, what? I'll take the NSX off your hands. Just had other toys. Just had other toys. And he's got $250,000 worth of cars in the woods just collecting dust. That's the sinner's task. Giving gifts is a kind and generous gesture. But as we practice gift giving during this holiday season, I want to just offer a word of warning. Be aware of all the temptations that tend to follow the accumulation of stuff in our lives. Now, a third thing, and we'll spend the most time on this one, is learning discernment when it comes to things that are harmless as well as things that are harmful. You might ask, where's the harm in Christmas? Where's the harm in the Santa tie? Where's the harm in the Christmas tree? Where's the harm in all of this? Now, I don't want to come across as any kind of alarmist. And again, as someone who is wearing a Santa tie and has a Christmas tree up at his house, I don't in any way want to come across as an alarmist. But let's be clear about something. There are many elements of the Christmas tradition that are at best problematic for Christians. Very rarely, and I think I have a real issue with this, very rarely do we allow fiction and mythology to live so intimately in our lives. Now you might say, what's the difference between Santa and watching a movie about a superhero? Or what's the difference between Santa and playing make-believe with your kids? Well, here's one thing, a distinction. We might watch a movie about superheroes, and we might read a book about the wizarding world. Or we might even look at some kind of like surrealist modern art. But it's very rarely do we tell our children that fiction and fantasy are going to literally enter into our home and eat our food and touch our stuff and see you when you're sleeping and knows everything that you're doing and if you're good or bad and has the moral power to even make that judgment on you. I don't know. To me, I guess that somewhere a line was crossed where I don't actually want my kids to believe that they can be Superman when they grow up. Like literally be Superman when they grow up. I don't want fiction and mythology to cross that boundary from fantasy, which is in many ways very harmless, to the real world. I want my kids to be couched in reality. And when I speak about things, I want my children to know that I also am couched in reality. And that truth matters to me, and truth matters in our family. Several passages that talk about the importance of learning discernment. Discernment being the wise discretion and understanding that there are good and harmless things, but there are also dangerous things. And those dangerous things can sometimes come packaged like harmless things. The medicine, for example, that comes in the form of a sweet gummy. And your kids don't realize that mouthful after mouthful after mouthful of those yummy gummies may actually be poisoning them. Romans chapter 16, for example, this is an interesting passage that until I was studying for this, it's one of those passages, I kind of forget that it's there sometimes. But it's a really, really fascinating passage in Romans 16, beginning in verse 17. Now I urge you, brethren, keep your eye on those who cause dissensions and hindrances contrary to the teaching which you learned, and turn away from them. For such men are slaves, not of our Lord Christ, but of their own appetites. And by their smooth and flattering speech, they deceive the hearts of the unsuspecting. For the report of your obedience has reached to all. Therefore, I am rejoicing over you. But I want you to be, look at what he says here. I want you to be wise in what is good and innocent in what is evil. Use wisdom. Think through these things. Have some discretion. Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 14, in this passage on learning maturity and growing up to become the Christians that we need to be, he concludes the chapter here in verse 14 by saying, solid food is for those who are mature, who because of practice have their senses trained to discern between good and evil. Philippians chapter 1 similarly speaks of this. If you go to Philippians chapter 1 verses 9 through 11, and this I pray that your love may abound still more and more in real knowledge and all discernment, so that you may approve the things that are excellent, in order to be sincere and blameless until the day of Christ, having been filled with the fruit of righteousness which comes through Jesus Christ, to the glory and the praise of God. And it takes wisdom to recognize what is harmless and harmful. Santa Claus, for example, and everything that's typically associated with his mythology, I believe, can be portrayed and shared in our families in a way that keeps our children rooted in truth and reality. I'm not anti-Santa Claus, but can we present Santa in a way that still keeps our kids kind of grounded in what's real versus what's not? And you notice I'm being very, very careful not to say the sentence that will get me in trouble today. We're being a little preacher two-step today. Not that I approve of dancing. Let me offer a suggestion. Can we describe him as a character in a story? Like any other character in a story. He's a character in a story, and he is very loosely based on a real historical figure. If someone says, is this person real? You can say, well, there is an element of him that is based on a real person. And you can look at the history, though I will say that the history of St. Nicholas is very scant. I mean, actual verifiable history around St. Nicholas is very, very scant. But there is some. A lot of it's legendary, and there's a lot of legend built around it, but there is some historical evidence to the reality of St. Nicholas. Can we talk about it as in we're playing Santa? Who wants to play Santa? We're going to play Santa. I think that's one way you can describe it. Can we tell our kids that Santa is a fun tradition, and he's a character that very importantly and pointedly reminds us that selflessness is the highest ideal of the Christian life, like Philippians chapter 2 talks about. That we need to learn to treat others as more important than ourselves, and to give of ourselves the way that Jesus gave of himself in such self-sacrifice to make our spiritual lives what they are. And I think in all of those ways, you don't have to throw a bucket of water onto the fun of Christmas and Santa Claus. But maybe there are more nuanced and clever ways that we can talk about him with our kids that, again, helps our kids to stay in reality. Well, what about the religious elements of Christmas? What about practicing Christmas as some kind of religious obligation to God? I think some of our friends and neighbors might think it a bit of a strange thing not to emphasize the religious side of Christmas. And I can understand to a degree making an appeal to Romans chapter 14. In Romans chapter 14, verses 5 and 6, the Apostle Paul does talk about one person regards a day as more important than another. Another person just regards all days as being basically equal. Now, is he talking about Christmas there? No, not in the context. He's not. And so Christmas per se is not actually being addressed by the passage in Romans 14. But on some very loose conceptual level, I think I can understand the appeal to Romans 14. Paul's point in that passage is that we need to not legislate where God has not legislated, to not loose where God has bound, and to not bind where God has loosed. But when it comes to religious duty, God has legislated that. When it comes to our actual obligations to God, that's not a Romans 14 issue. Like, what I am obligated and commanded to do by God is not a Romans 14 issue. It's not just toss it at Romans 14 and just do whatever you want with it. My obligation and my duty to God is not an optional thing. It's not to be based on or couched in human tradition. It is something that God has in fact legislated. The celebration of Christmas as a work of the church, or as an official holy day on a Christian calendar, or as a sanctified and God-ordained, God-organized event, is never taught in Scriptures. I'm not going to apologize for that. It's just not. Christians are never anywhere in the Scriptures commanded to celebrate Christmas as a religious event. They're just not. And I find it as a deeply ironic thing that the most important day on most professed believers' calendars, the most important day of the year, the pinnacle of what many people say is the expression of Christian faith, is something God never even commanded us to do. That's kind of an ironic thing. That if you polled most people out there, say, well, what's the most important day of the year for your church? Oh, Christmas, for sure. Christmas is the most important day for our church. And it's something, the most important day of the year is something God never even commanded you to do. I mean, it's almost like somebody getting to the end of high school saying, like, I was the captain of the basketball team. I was the captain of the football team. I was first chair violin. Well, where's your diploma? Well, I never did my homework. It's like, I was too busy being captain of every team and being first chair. I was too busy with the extracurricular activities that weren't actually requirements for graduating high school that I never really got around to doing any of the homework that would have helped me graduate high school. And I do think that's problematic. That's very, very problematic. All right. So you're saying we can't have Christmas. That's what you're saying, Ryan, right? Because I'll tell you, anytime I've ever preached on Christmas, there's always someone who says, wait, I think I misunderstood you. Are you saying we can't have Christmas this year? I'm not a villain from a cartoon or something. This is like the year Ryan stole Christmas. I want to be clear about something. Almost everything associated with Christmas that most people do is never condemned in Scripture. Gift giving, that's not condemned. God doesn't condemn gift giving. Having special days that are special to us. I mean, if Christmas as a special day is condemned, then so is your birthday, and so is Thanksgiving, and so is the 4th of July. So it's not like having a special day of the year is not condemned. Feasting is certainly not condemned in the Bible. In fact, feasting on certain occasions done in the right way is encouraged, I think, in Scripture. Practicing human traditions, there's nothing wrong with human traditions as long as Matthew 15 is taken into account and the human traditions don't ever override or interfere with what God actually commands. It's like God never categorically condemns human tradition as such. or playing make-believe with imaginary characters, or even rejoicing over anything and everything that our Lord Jesus did in his lifetime. And I will say that includes celebrating his birth. The angels certainly celebrated it. We read Luke 2 already. Were the angels happy that Jesus was born? Sure sounds like it. I mean, it seems pretty clear to me from Luke chapter 2 and verse 14 or verse 20 that when the shepherds went away from it, it does say in verse 20, they went away and rejoiced greatly. Were they, in some sense, celebrating the birth of Jesus? Absolutely. In 1 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 16, he describes things that are by our common confession. He says the church is the pillar and the support of truth, and then he offers this really interesting, almost like a poem, almost like the lyrics to a hymn in verse 16 that talks about what our common confession is. And the incarnation of God in the flesh as Jesus, his coming to this world in the flesh, is one of the key and most important things by way of common confession for Christians. But anything that we do at Christmas, let me be clear, anything that we do at Christmas cannot replace or supplement or override what is the revealed will of our Father in ordaining and commanding how, when, and why we practice our faith. God alone commands us. God alone dictates to us. God alone sets the boundaries as well as opens up the floodgates to things that are related to him and worshiping him and representing him and speaking in his name. So let me bring our lesson to a close with just some quick bullet points, and I'll make it short, and then we'll have an invitation. Christmas should not be viewed as a religious duty, because all of Christ's life is to be celebrated in our worship. But there is only one specific event that has any formal scriptural ritual that's attached to it, and that's the Lord's Supper. It's described in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. Christmas should not undermine your credibility as a parent. And I'll say this, you only have so much room in your life and only so much time with your children to teach them truth. You only have so much time to teach them truth. And anything that you do as a parent that somehow couples together Jesus with mythology can be very disastrous for you in the long run. Because if your mythology can be dismantled by good, skeptical arguments, then what about the parts that are true? Christmas should not be all about the stuff. Rather, it should be an opportunity to put an important Christian virtue into real-world practice. You want to call it the season of giving? Well, then give something. How long has it been since you have given something? Not just luxuries and extra items to those who already have in abundance, but when was the last time you gave to someone who could never pay you back, someone who could never give you a gift in exchange, to someone who's happy not to have luxury items, but just to have basic things? Christmas should not be a cause of offense or disunity in the church also. I believe that there is a way to practice Christmas without stomping on any other brother or sister's scruples. I believe there's a way to practice it without causing a stumbling block. And Jesus says in Matthew chapter 18, "Woe to the one by whom the stumbling blocks come." Now, if you're not a Christian here on this lovely, gorgeous, sunny day, I hope that you can recognize, maybe that's a strange sermon. Maybe you came in here thinking like, well, we're going to hear the gospel today. Well, I want you to hear the gospel. But we also want to be purveyors of truth. Truth of every kind. Truth in this area of life and truth in that area of life. And it's the time of year where I do think the Christmas story gets kind of jumbled and mishandled. And we lose sight of what it's really all about. Jesus Christ came into this world not just to be born and be a baby in a manger that you can keep in a nice tidy nativity scene on your bookshelf. Jesus came to become the rugged preacher, the dogged teacher, the rabbi who confronted error with truth, the Son of Man who fulfilled prophecies, the Son of God who brought salvation. The one dying on the cross, bleeding in agony for our sins. It is not the beginning of the life of Jesus that is to be celebrated most of all. It's what he did at the end of his life that makes our spiritual lives possible. And if you need to become a Christian this day, then you need to respond to that gospel message. Whatever spiritual needs you might have, please let it be known by coming forward as we stand and sing.
I am resolved no longer to linger, charmed by the world's delight.